because from this side Company 5 could observe during the day at dusk. We took turns going up to the outpost. These days, the direction of Company 5 and Company 7 was temporarily stable. Now the north direction, slightly to the rear of the battalion headquarters, was manned by no one, so Company 6 had to be withdrawn here to the right of the Company 6 outpost was Battalion 9, so Company 8 also had to take on a direction of the outpost and could not lie near the battalion headquarters anymore at this time. It could be said that almost everywhere on the road forefront undertaken by our Regiment 266 was very tense. Not only in our battalion, but other places were also besieged by them continuously in this area. There was almost never a moment without the sound of artillery and guns exploding loudly regardless of day or night. They were trying to concentrate forces along with tanks and armored vehicles trying desperately to retake the town of Kampong Speu. The units at this time were also having to fight back decisively to protect the town and protect the ammo depot, preventing it from falling into the hands of the pot troops. One day early in the morning in the direction of Battalion 9, we heard rapid explosions and the sound of M113 vehicles roaring continuously from morning until about more than 9 a.m., before pausing temporarily before that. At about nearly 8 a.m. there was about a platoon of pot troops trying to slip through the gap between the outpost of Company 6 and the outpost of Battalion 9. Perhaps this group intended to attack the rear of Battalion 9 or maybe Company 6 itself. Luckily, our scouts discovered them and pushed them out to the open field north of Road 4, so a few of us signal soldiers and transport soldiers turned back to the rear to support the scouts in destroying them. This group ran in the middle of the field like ducks, and our brothers charged and chased after them and wiped them out, not leaving a single one. After finishing, we eliminated the wounded, no prisoners or anything messy. By noon, things were stable on our Battalion 8 side. Only the direction of Battalion 9 was still fighting fiercely. The explosions echoed back to us rapidly, and not until that evening did we receive the sad news that Brother Tung, the battalion commander of Battalion 9, had sacrificed his life after this battle a few days later in front of the outpost of Company 6. The enemy was clinging on very strongly. The unit organized a decisive attack to dislodge the enemy to relieve the tension for Company 6. At 2 a.m., the battalion began to march deep into the enemy rear to attack back toward the front of the Company 6 outpost. At that time, it was called a battalion for prestige, but gathered together there were probably about 30 infantry soldiers, plus some soldiers from the battalion headquarters reinforcing 175mm recoilless rifle from the regiment and one recoilless rifle from the battalion headquarters. The rest had to stay to hold the outpost, starting to infiltrate deep in front of the Company 8 outpost, surpassing Company 8. By nearly 1 kilometer we started to turn right. We just walked silently like that in the quiet, cool night. Occasionally from the outposts gunfire would flare up urgently, and then silence. This time was the dry season, so marching on the open fields was easier. The enemy forward outposts were dense, avoiding a few safe outposts, but when nearly approaching the designated position, we encountered another enemy forward outpost. This time, we were exposed. The enemy fired a few bursts and then put their heads down and ran. We were unharmed. The unit continued to execute the plan as proposed. We reached the position. By now it was about 5 a.m., and in the east it was getting light. The unit met a group of enemies and opened fire. They left behind one dead body and one seriously wounded. We captured one AK and one K63. The unit was still developing across the open field, just clinging to a paddy dike with a row of sugar palm trees, when suddenly we heard the sound of tanks and armored vehicles roaring and firing fiercely at the leading spearhead. Brothers had already sacrificed. The infantry still clung to the paddy dike to fight back. The gunner of the 82mm recoilless rifle did not wait to mount the tripod, but fired an applied shot immediately. A ball of fire covered the front of the tank, but it still loomed forward, firing a second round, but missed, so the tanks along with other vehicles and the pot infantry aggressively rushed in to attack us head on. The 75mm recoilless rifle traveling in the battalion headquarters formation could not support the front line in time, so it had to lie in the rear supporting the front. Unable to move up to shoot the tanks, our soldiers started to waver, running back to hide behind sugar palm mounds to fight back against the enemy. Our situation now was too disadvantageous. In front, the infantry brothers were still stubbornly clinging to the tree lines to fight back against the enemy. At this time, we were still lying there, taking the beating. Armored vehicle bullets fired across from the left flank. Enemy infantry attacked in at this time. The formation was truly in chaos. I handed the 75mm recoilless rifle shell to Thuan to fire toward the right flank to reduce the enemy attack strength. Dear comrades, after the battle, and until now I still cannot understand why that day when going to battle, I did not carry a gun but only carried a single 75mm recoilless rifle shell while weapons should be the inseparable object of a soldier. After the shell was fired, I was a soldier with empty hands in front supporting each other. We started to retreat. I also ran back to the rear. Suddenly bursts of bullets exploded, pushing from the left flank. We ran, drifting to the right. I saw dust rising up in front of the enemy guns running. I met a high paddy dyke and hurriedly jumped down. There was brother at the transport, vice platoon leader, and an infantry soldier carrying a B-40. Brother Hat also did not have a gun like me. Then I saw him take a B-gun from the infantry soldier, intending to shoot at the dusty place, but hesitating he pulled the B round out of the barrel where the propellant charge was torn a bit, exposing the propellant stick. So he threw the B-40 round away and handed the gun back to the infantry soldier. Later I thought maybe at that time he was just showing off to us, but that round could still be fired. This guy was a soldier from 72, but also a bit of a shirker. Otherwise, if he were a real combat soldier, he would have been a company commander, not a warrant officer. Lying at the battalion headquarters at that time, Mortars were left behind above battalion political officer. Deo shouted for the brothers to attack up to retrieve the Mortars. The unit organized an attack, but our initiative was lost. Enemy infantry now combined with the steel shield of M113 as just bulldozed us. Gradually, infantry soldiers used paddy dykes and mounds to fight back. Regiment mortars were also supporting actively, but effectiveness was not high for fear of hitting our own soldiers. About 11 a.m., the battle gradually subsided. Both us and the enemy held our positions. Occasionally, artillery tanks and 12.8mm guns on enemy armored vehicles fired into the unit formation in the rear. We still heard the roaring unceasingly. Perhaps they were towing the 2 damaged vehicles at that time. Brother Hat and I, along with transport, carried wounded and Mortars back to the battalion. These were Mortars who sacrificed later, while the brothers who sacrificed in front could not be retrieved. Yet among them was Tata Hanoi native, a soldier of the 78 Mortars. He was from communications transferred down to infantry holding a B-41 that afternoon. The unit organized another attack to retrieve the Mortars but did not succeed and had to hold position to wait for an opportunity at night after bringing the Mortars back. I did not return to the unit but stayed at the battalion headquarters outpost until the next morning. A few other soldiers and I, along with the deputy battalion commander, returned to the scene of yesterday's fighting. The soldier brothers, after a day and night of tension and hardship, looked visibly thinner, but the mission to retrieve Mortars was not done, so we could not withdraw. Yet everywhere infantry utilized earthbanks, scooped out bunkers for fortifications for defense. But in the dry season the soil was hard to dig, so the firing holes were shallow. Now another problem arose, which was a lack of water. Besides a little water we had just brought up, perhaps the enemy also knew we were determined to get the Mortars, so they also tried to hold, so both sides just hammered each other fiercely. We had additional support from regiment and division firepower, but the pot troops were no pushovers, not understanding where their mortars and artillery came from. But they fired continuously. The battlefield on both sides was blinded by smoke, and both us infantry could not charge, so both us and the enemy had to lie and take the beating until about noon. We radioed back to ask the regiment to retreat, so the battle intended to break the siege for Company 6 was unsuccessful. We had to withdraw, leaving behind 3 Mortars in there. It was extremely painful. Please, brothers, forgive us. We tried to bring you back, but failed. The unit then retreated in order to prevent an enemy counterattack. After arriving at Company 6, the soldiers lay sprawled out, tired after a day and night of sacrifice and hardship without achieving the result in having to leave behind 3 brothers lying in there. We were extremely sad, not knowing if our brothers would keep their bodies intact with those inhumane people. That afternoon, soldiers of the companies returned to their positions. The next day, the battalion headquarters held a meeting to draw experience from the battle. Our communications platoon had a discussion for each soldier, so my crime of returning to the battalion headquarters was brought up for criticism. Most annoying was that guy, the squad leader of the 2-watt radio from Thatch, who just kept having opinions to discipline me before the battalion. He just stayed at home and did not go on this battle. He knew I had returned to sleep at the battalion headquarters, but he did not know I returned because I was bringing wounded back. Feeling the rage, I cursed him right then, as a soldier from 74 getting angry. He and I almost fought at that time. Brother Son, the platoon leader, and the Brothers confirmed for me, so I was relieved psychologically also because of that. I was very fed up with this communications platoon. Also, let me add that afterward our unit shifted wings to the Road 5 side, still having a component stay behind to do the work of searching for and taking care of wounded and martyrs on the battlefield, to find ways to bring the brothers back. As I said in the previous part, when at the battalion headquarters every night, we took turns crossing to the other side of the Lotus Pond to the outpost right behind Company 5 to protect the left flank for Company 5 and the front of the battalion headquarters here. We only had 5 brothers and 5 aches if we met strong enemy forces. We would only fire a few sporadic bursts and then rely entirely on the 60mm mortars from Company 5 firing back and 82mm mortars from Company 8 firing over to support, but the enemy did not care about this position, so we were also idle while elsewhere. The enemy kept attacking continuously, making the brothers lose sleep and appetite staying at the battalion headquarters for a few days. I went up to Company 7 to replace the duty rotation returning. To Company 7 I met old brothers and felt happy at that time in front of the Company 7 outpost. There was an old horse path cutting from the rear through the outpost there in front of the outpost on the other side. Occasionally the enemy walked back and forth arrogantly, very disrespectful of our soldiers. The liaison soldier somehow found a K63 gun. This type fired a K ammo with a 20-round magazine fitting the AK gun, but the 30-round AK magazine did not fit this gun, so the two of us lay back behind that outpost group to sniper ambush. 1 noon, stalking for a long time, seeing them start to be subjective. 2 guys were walking arrogantly on the road, so the liaison soldier and I fought over who would shoot well. I let him show off his talent first. He aimed and aligned, then fired a shot, not knowing if he hit or not, but looking up I did not see anyone, and from then on we did not see the pot troops dare to be arrogant anymore during this time on the Company 7 outpost. Occasionally I acted as a bodyguard for Deputy Company Commander Bay to inspect the outposts at night. One day in the morning, Company Commander Ho organized an infantry platoon to flank left through the coconut grove combined with inside the outpost, attacking up to relieve the front of the outpost. Inside the outpost opened fire first to attract the enemy. The left flank moved along the sparse tree line to advance and then attacked the left flank. The enemy was too surprised and exposed. The enemy had to abandon their property to save their lives. Seizing the opportunity inside the outpost, rushed out to share the fire with the brothers. The enemy burst out of their bunkers and ran, losing their sandals. The brothers captured quite a few war trophies and then had to retreat immediately to preserve forces. Our soldiers did not suffer a single scratch. Hearing the brothers say they killed 7 guys, the battle took place only within about 20 or 30 minutes, returning to the position. Everyone's face was cheerful. The meal that afternoon was lively. I also felt happy with the victory of the brothers. That was also a warning blow for the pot troops to watch out. We were temporarily stable on this side for a while, but over in the direction of Company 8 and Company 6, and the side of Battalion 9 almost every day, the fighting was tense. Hearing the explosions, we knew the enemy was trying desperately to retake the town and the logistics warehouses, while we, of course, had to determine to hold to the end. So in the sky of Kampong Speu, there was almost no day without explosions, no day without the smoke screens of fires. In some places, water was very scarce. We had to wait 2 or 3 days to take turns bathing. Once the hot, stifling atmosphere was just like a roasting pan. Officers and soldiers, everyone looked gaunt, bodies dirty and smelly, nerves always tense. Now remembering back when we had just liberated Phnom Penh, shouting liberated, now we can relax. Because about 2 days after liberation, we went to sweep the pot remnants, just like going on a picnic, so we partly caught the disease of subjectivity. Now we knew better, not knowing if this situation kept dragging on, whether we could hold out here. Let me open a parenthesis, asking permission from Uncle Kwang and everyone to share more opinions from Uncle Van Thang, a staff officer of Regiment 266, so everyone can visualize more about the situation in the area Uncle Kwang was holding at that time. This is a very critical issue, especially after the liberation of the capital Phnom Penh. Later, when writing on the internet, someone claimed that we knew in advance that after the liberation of Phnom Penh the enemy would only flee, not disintegrate, so there were plans to maneuver troops for attacks to destroy the enemy later. In reality, it was not quite like that at that time. At the division headquarters, Van Thunka days as the political duty officer and saw right at the division headquarters handling very tense situations. The enemy clung continuously. We lost outposts in many places, but the form of combat had not yet been defined. How much was the enemy force? What were Their plots and tricks, how our fighting method should be active and proactive. I think to some extent commanders at all levels, including levels higher than division, also perceived the situation at that time like what Nok Kwang just presented above, thinking that after the liberation of Phnom Penh, the enemy would be weak, would be easy to breathe, only having to sweep in the true sense of cleaning the area gently, not as fiercely as before, remembering the days close to the Lunar New Year. Van Thang went down to Battalion 9, accompanying Comrade Tung, the battalion commander. Uncle Tung, later sacrificed as in Uncle Kwang's memoir, going down to the outpost of Company 10. Company 10, at that time, had troop numbers reinforced by forces from other companies, some brothers in the battalion. Headquarters went down to fight, leaving only about 9 people. Officers of the platoon, company, and battalion all proposed to sortie, having to circle wide to surround tightly from afar, unable to keep fighting the enemy in the style of banking earth and holding outposts like this anymore. Finally, the combat method, according to the soldiers' proposal, was accepted, and solving the combat situation afterward developed in a more favorable direction. One morning, in front of the outpost of Company 6 and Battalion 9, suddenly gunfire erupted rapidly and lasted long, until about nearly noon that day. The gunfire in that direction temporarily paused until about 1 p.m. in front of the Company 6 outpost. In the distance, we saw a group of soldiers moving into the Company 6 outpost, not knowing if it was friend or foe. Our soldiers were very vigilant, avoiding the enemy's trick of surrendering falsely. A burst of a K was fired to probe the other side. Out there, immediately deployed and moved to attack Company 6. Our soldiers were still suspicious of such blatant audacity, so they radioed the battalion to report. At this time, we received news that in front were soldiers of Battalion 5, Regiment 270, attacking on the other side in the morning, and now returning here. Nearly had a big fight between two sides. When Battalion 5 marched past the battalion headquarters, I ran out to look for Hai, a compatriot from the same neighborhood. Meeting him, I learned he was in heavy machine guns. Looking at him, he was also gaunt, dark, and dirty clothes torn to shreds. I hurriedly ran back to rummage for a set of clothes made of green fabric, self-sewn with fabric taken from the pot warehouse, and ran after to give it to him. Also later I heard the officers recount that us soldiers did not know, but right from the start Battalion 5 had quickly detected us because they had reconfirmed coordinates, while our side also received orders to be careful to avoid mistaking our own troops, or both sides would be in trouble. After the battle of the units of Regiment 270 and Regiment 273 in front of our outpost and other places a few days later, there were many changes. It seemed the pot troops had absorbed our painful blows. They only had small fragmented activities intended to harass, and no longer had attacks with tanks and armored vehicles. Artillery also seemed silent. We could breathe much easier just as it quieted down a bit. Us soldiers had to take the opportunity to improve our diet, as mentioned in previous parts. Behind the battalion headquarters at that time was a banana garden and a water spinach creek. One day that from transport, and I crept over to the Company 8 side to find a few explosive charges of the 200-gram type to go blast fish in the Lotus Pond area. But on the other side of the bridge, across the rickety wooden bridge connecting the two banks of the Lotus Pond, the two of us followed the bank and threw 2 charges, but got no fish when returning across the wooden bridge. Not knowing what demon possessed us with 2 more charges left, I told that to rig them to the bridge and light the fuse. The 2 of us put our heads down and ran. 2 explosions rang out the middle section of the bridge. Lost a chunk. The officers rushed out to check where the explosion was, but when they got there, the 2 of us had slipped away by another route. Close call, but it punished us for the next few nights. When going to ambush at the forward outpost, having to circle far around to the other side, so we had to fumble around finding wooden planks to bridge it again. But it was not like before, because now every time we wanted to cross, we had to go on all fours, truly just like apes, really naughty and foolish, like soldiers. One day I was ordered up to Company 8 to man the radio. At this time, Company 6 had retreated the outpost to the right flank, lying slightly behind the battalion headquarters. So at that time, Battalion 8 was the forward outpost, the position of the Company 8 outpost. As I said in the previous part, surrounding the Company 8 outpost was a trench line about 5 meters deep and up to 2 meters wide. Tanks would have trouble crossing, but there was a branch trench there connecting up to the old Company 6 outpost. Precisely because of this, the pot troops secretly followed that trench bank many times to creep into Company 8. Therefore, at that time, Company 8 had to assign 3 soldiers during the day to ambush right at the head of that trench line, coming back at night because there were not enough people to guard, but at night, even without guards, the company had arranged DH-10 mines planted along the middle of the trench. The mine was hung on a wooden stick across about 30 centimeters from the trench bottom with electric caps and enough wire. In charge of this mine was an outpost group lying near there one day. At about 4 a.m., sleeping soundly, suddenly a boom rang out. The brothers immediately sprang up, but after that explosion the space fell into silence until about more than 5 a.m. when the soldiers got up to brush their teeth and wash their faces. The enemy mortars started dropping freshly onto Company 8, throwing everything. The soldiers scrambled to jump into bunkers. A moment later, after the mortar barrage, came small arms and firepower shooting like rainier, splitting into the outpost. Our soldiers still had no reaction because at that time we had not seen any enemy faces yet. It turned out that at that time the enemy was concentrating inside the old Company 6 outpost lying right in front of Company 8 and firing from there. They did not dare to advance because they had to cross a narrow open field after a while, determining the enemy position. Our 260mm mortars and 282mm mortars started to respond at a narrow distance of only about 500 or 600 meters. The mortars just aimed at the stilt houses and fired rapidly. Smoke and raging fires rose high, pounding continuously like that for about 30 minutes. The mortars stopped firing and we did not see the enemy resist any. Probably they must have been scared out of their wits and fled from that place. A while later, when we went out to the place where the DH-10 mine exploded to check the results, we saw a section of that trench torn apart with dust, smoke, and blood splattered everywhere. It was unclear how many of them had gone to meet their maker, but from that day on that area was safe. At that time, Company 8 outpost was very short on water. The whole area only had one pump well, a UNICEF-style well. This place seemed to have been a former base of the lone Knoll puppet troops taking advantage of free time. We often went there to fetch water for daily use. One day, while hesitating and bobbing up and down to pump water, we were sniped by the enemy. Hearing the hiss of bullets, we threw everything and ran. We did not know if it was really a sniper or if we were just being paranoid, but if it had been a real sniper, I would not be sitting here telling you this story anymore. I do not know if the enemy had lost their fighting strength because of the painful blows they had absorbed over the past days, but for the last few days they only operated sporadically and were not as tense as before. However, in front of the infantry outposts they still took pot shots occasionally. Our soldiers were very furious, so occasionally the brothers organized attacks, pushing out in front of the outposts to probe the enemy and at the same time clear the area in front of the outposts, while we still took the opportunity to go improve our diet with vegetables and fruits. As mentioned in the previous part, right behind the battalion headquarters, there were many enemy logistics warehouses that could not be moved in time. Among them was a special warehouse for the Cambodian people, which was the warehouse for Prahok fish paste. We often went foraging past there. The jars and pots used to store the paste had been dragged out by the locals, but not yet transported, so they stank to high heaven. Few days later, seeing that this salt warehouse was also swept clean, the civilians started to move to other warehouses like the sewing machine warehouse, the fabric warehouse, and so on. The rice warehouse had been set on fire by someone unknown and was still smoldering, so behind the battalion headquarters every day there were civilians looting, causing trouble for the reconnaissance brothers and soldiers of the platoons who had to be on duty every day at the rear to prevent civilians from entering near the battalion headquarters area. During this time, Company 5 managed to find a Honda 67 motorbike in the motorcycle warehouse that was still in good working order, so the old guys begged for gasoline from the regiment drivers, and every afternoon they would start the engine, creating smoke billowing up like a house on fire. Riding back to the explosive ammo dump to get ammo or teaching each other how to drive. The pot troops discovered this, so they just waited for when the brothers started the engine and the smoke rose up to mortar the area. There were mortar rounds that strayed into the company headquarters area. The officers yelled and banned starting the engine near there, so they had to move back to the rear. Then only a few days later, when the gas ran out, the bike was also thrown away. During the period of more than 2 months our unit was stationed in the Kampong Speu area, we had to witness so much loss and sacrifice of our comrades. So many sons of Vietnam had to lie down forever in this place. But also in this very place we taught the enemy memorable lessons about bravery and the endurance of hardships of the Vietnamese volunteer soldiers, so that eventually the cunning plots of the pot troops and their big brother sponsor were also bankrupted. Also during the time here we received news that our northern border was being attacked by the Chinese troops, and also during this time I received quite a few letters from my family, in which one letter said my family was preparing to evacuate to Hong Kong because we were suspected of being Vietnamese of Chinese origin, while Both of us brothers were still fighting on the southwestern border. Later, when I returned, I heard my father recount that at that time, the neighborhood leaders came to persuade my family to migrate, but my father refused. He said the state must return my 2 sons who are still in the army first. Then I will go. When I received this letter, I truly felt a sense of depression. But the war was getting fiercer and fiercer, and I did not have much time to think. After a while, I was cheerful again, stepping forward with my comrades on the arduous paths of the Cambodian battlefield. When recalling these stories, I do not mean to blame anyone, because if there is hatred in my heart, it is hatred for the Chinese expansionists who caused so much pain for our Vietnam. One evening after the briefing was finished, there was an order that the next morning the unit would move. The next morning, everything was ready. I did not know when the companies had handed over their outposts. As for the battalion headquarters, we did not see any soldiers coming to receive the unit. When we left, we marched out to Road 4. The direction of the march was back toward Phnom Penh. Then we got off the trucks and continued marching on foot on both sides of the road. I saw scenes of fields and gardens and trees burnt black, leaving only piles of ashes, contributing to making the atmosphere even more stifling and sultry. Marching until about 2 p.m. we started to turn right onto a dirt road and continued marching until about 5 p.m. when the unit stopped at the designated location. At that time I heard this was the sugar factory area. We did not pay attention to where the sugar factory was, because the whole day of marching was too exhausting. Our soldiers lay sprawled out, resting, lying wherever they could. At about more than 5 p.m., the positions of each squad and platoon in the battalion headquarters were stabilized according to the assignment. Our wire squad lay in a dried rice field with only stubble left. After dinner, the officers briefed us to rest until 2 a.m. when the unit would conduct a deep penetration operation, so everyone tried to snatch a nap lying in the middle of the field, sleeping without mosquito nets or hammocks or anything. It felt like I had just closed my eyes for a moment when I was woken up, still groggy. We received our ration of rice balls and hit the road. Remembering back in more than 2 months stationed in Kampong Speu, there was only one deep penetration mission, but this time the unit continued to penetrate deep. The rapid breathing of soldiers carrying heavy loads, combined with the nervousness and the sound of guns and ammo clashing against each other in the quiet night, seemed clearer at that time. The unit marched in a single file formation. After passing about 2 villages, I just guessed so because the night was dark and the vegetation was quite dense. We were marching smoothly when suddenly in front the troops ran scattering to both sides. Us in the rear did not know what was happening and also ran following the chain reaction. Oh my God, it turned out to be a herd of cows, about a dozen of them running straight into the unit's formation, causing such chaos. What a pity. If it were daytime, the soldiers would have had a hearty meal of fresh meat. After reorganizing the formation, we continued. After passing a wide field, we reached a village in front. Seeing an irrigation canal that had dried up, we stopped to rest right at the canal. It was nearly dawn. A while later, when it was fully light, the infantry companies began to deploy formation, flooding into the village in front. Seeing no enemy when we followed in, it was a desolate scene, not a single soul or livestock. Perhaps the people had just run to the sugar factory area to take refuge. Resting for a bit, we continued to advance into the second village. Unlike the previous village here, there were enemies. When they detected us, the enemy inside fired out only a few bursts of AK. Our side fired back a few bursts while advancing, and the enemy ran away somewhere in this village. I saw 2 rows of small and low stilt houses. In the middle was an irrigation canal, but with a lot of muddy water. That noon we rested inside the village. In the afternoon, we proceeded to sweep deeper inside, only encountering the enemy a few times, sporadically firing a few bursts, and then running. The enemy was not destroyed, and we did not suffer any losses. The next morning we had 6 Cambodian guerrillas guiding us to continue the sweep. When arriving at a village, in front was an open field. Just as we started to cross the field to enter the village, suddenly the enemy opened fire. The formation immediately spread out to attack. Gunfire of all kinds exploded rapidly. The 82mm mortars fired in support of the infantry. The muzzle report sounded cracked. Suddenly I heard a boom. I turned back to the mortar position and saw dust and smoke blinding when we ran there. Oh God, I could not believe my eyes. Right under the 82mm mortar near the base, it was snapped in half. 2 mortar soldiers were lying prone around it. The soldier dropping the shell into the barrel had both legs crushed and was trying to crawl up to the edge of the pit. The medics urgently applied first aid, but it was too late. 2 mortar soldiers had died. Only the soldier with crushed legs remained, and transport urgently took him to surgery. It was truly a Disaster for Company 8. I heard this was ammo taken from the explosive ammo dump in Kampong Speu. The primers had been shock damaged by bombs, so they self-destructed inside the barrel later. The mortar soldiers were very afraid of this type of ammo, but over time they forgot truly deafness knows no fear. Returning to the battle after a period of overwhelming fire, the unit began to enter the village in the direction of other companies. I did not know how it went, but in our battalion headquarters direction I heard we also killed 4 guys at about 1 p.m. We continued to develop to link up with Battalion 9. While moving the front line, encountered the enemy gunfire of all kinds, exploded rapidly. Soldiers moving across an open field were pinned down by enemy firepower at that time. All battalion headquarters was also closely following the infantry companies. The battalion headquarters lay under a high paddy dike with many sugar palm trees growing along the dike. Suddenly a burst of 60mm mortars fired into the battalion headquarters formation. Brother Din, a battalion officer, was standing observing the battlefield. I was sitting right near him under a high dike. At that time I saw right before my eyes, about 6 meters away, smoke and dust rose up, then a loud explosion. A piece of shrapnel embedded into his calf, but luckily it only hit soft tissue. But a soldier from the class of 78 from Thatch Ha, who was standing taking cover behind a sugar palm tree, slowly collapsed. When we ran to him, he had stopped breathing. A piece of shrapnel had hit him in the nape of the neck. At this time in front, the gunfire was still sporadic.